in the business. My name is Alex Keene. I work for Keene Independent Research. I'm the COO and senior consultant. I'm the project manager from our side for the venue market analysis and feasibility study. And this is our final Denver Arts Community presentation. We've had a nice iterative process. We've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of you over a couple different sessions. And so now we're here today to share our findings and recommendations and here's some feedback from all of you. We absolutely encourage that you share your voice and opinion, because this is what we're here for.
So just on behalf of the project team, which includes arts and venues, but also DCPA, Opera Colorado, and Colorado Ballet, thank you all for the time that you all have given to provide input on uses and activation at the Arts Complex. It's certainly a question that we've been asking for several years now, and this is our most recent effort, and your input is really valuable as part of that. It may not be the last time we'll ever come to you and ask you questions, but certainly this is the last meeting, as Mark and Alex mentioned, under this particular feasibility study, but I think it's really informing our organization and others on how to best utilize the Arts Complex that we have today, and also think about how to make it available in the future. So I'm just grateful for your time on a beautiful fall afternoon, and look forward to the conversation that follows. So thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. All giving myself credit, all the notes I gave you, it's perfect. So just kind of going through our presentation overview really quick. We're going to kind of go through just some basic overview, background, marketplace findings, our qualitative findings, kind of sharing with you what we've heard from you, our inventory and utilization for the Arts Complex, our recommendations, and then obviously our discussion. Now, we encourage you, please feel free to stop us in the middle of something needs a little bit more discussion or explanation. I mean, we don't feel like you got to wait to the end. The idea is this is an open dialogue and a conversation. So I encourage you, please raise your hand and say, you, Alex, need to do a better job of explaining that. I appreciate it. So anyway, kind of, that's a nice little map. Everybody, I assume, has been to the Arts Complex, knows what we're talking about. So kind of going through where we are today. So we had started this project back in January, and we've now seen it through all of the seasons. And so we're sitting at right here where we're just finishing up our final recommendations, sharing sessions with the community, and we're going to take all the information from today and help synthesize it into our final recommendations, which will be in our final summary report. Our intention right now is for at least some iteration of that summary report to be public. There's a lot of confidential information in that we cannot share, especially since we've been working with all of the different resident companies. We certainly don't want to do anything to jeopardize their work, but there will be some type of deliverable that will have a community focus. So please be aware of that, and hopefully that'll be coming towards the end of this study. We talked about themes last time. We'll talk about them again. The idea is it was informed by data. There's been a lot of other studies in the past that have all looked at different data. This is obviously the most, the newest version of that, but we took a deeper dive in some other studies, especially on specifically things like utilization, ticket sales, kind of how the Arts Complex is being utilized today. And we looked really specifically from a demographic trend of how is Denver growing, where is Denver going, and how does that impact all the different resident companies and the Denver arts community. Due diligence was a key theme. Janice and I have spoken a lot about this, due diligence and right sizing, with the idea of looking at what had been done in the past and saying, okay, were those findings, they were relevant for the day, 2014, 2010, back in, this whole project has been studied to death over the years. Are those findings still relevant today? And another idea of right sizing, some recommendations in the past have been very much bold visions, but do they make sense for the operational realities, who actually wants to use the complex, that type of stuff. Definitely a nothing is set in stone attitude. We did not come to this project saying, okay, there is some sacred cow that we cannot change. We cannot make recommendations against, we cannot change the approach of. And so we came with that in mind. It was absolutely critical. Truly independence and transparency. The reason why you hire consultants is to have that. the idea of having people come from an outside perspective and look at what you're doing and kind of give their thoughts. And then synthesizing a lot of disparate information. There's information about this campus, the complex, and tons of different studies, tons of different ticketing databases, and so it really required a holistic look at all of the different users of the arts complex and what they're doing now and what we think they'll be doing in the future. And then I think just really developing what we hope is a model for future success. We do not have all of the answers for what should be done, but we think we're setting the framework for a really good pathway forward. So the first thing we're going to talk about is marketplace. So the beautiful picture sourced from Wikipedia of Denver, obviously. Denver's growing. We all know this. We all live it. You can count the amount of cranes outside, right? This city is changing, and it's changing quickly. There's absolutely our favorable demographics right now for the arts, and we think that's going to continue into the future. That really has to do with how kind of the age of Denver right now. Denver's getting younger, but we anticipate over time it's going to get older, and your older demographic tend to be your heavy art supporters. And so Denver's going to continue to grow, and that whole age is going to kind of move with it. And we also see education here. Education is a really good indicator for arts attendance, and so this is a highly educated city. It's continuing to get even more educated, and so Denver is definitely going to be a market like some other really good arts markets in the country that has really favorable demographics. So it's a big thumbs up, right? The other thing that we found is the marketplace reports itself to be strong. We spoke with, I think, 16 or 18 different venues in the Denver metropolitan region and asked them how they're doing. And are they successful? Are they struggling? What are the opportunities for growth? And for the most part, we really heard that where we'd like to hear those percentages of utilization, that 70%, 80% utilization, most of the venues in town are reporting somewhere in there. And so that really tells us the marketplace is doing well. If you haven't noticed, also, people are building venues. The Mission Ballroom is the newest, shiniest object, right? But there's not this idea that we haven't built a venue in Denver in 10 years. Things are changing every day. And so when we've talked to all these operators, we've really heard that they're doing well. The only major struggle is they have enough staffing to take care of the amount of events that they want to do. So whether that's rentals, concerts, whatever. And we've looked specifically at all the different arts complex residents and can report they're all healthy, they're doing well, they're growing. And so that's a really, really good sign. I've said this a million times, but I'll say it again. This is not true of every city in the country. Denver is unique. It has a favorable performing arts market, and we anticipate that will continue to grow. And we've looked at how our demand projections go into 2050. So big thumbs up for Denver. Other cities wouldn't get that same thumbs up, so it's a good place to be if you're in the arts. Something else with our qualitative findings here, we took a bunch of different avenues for reaching out to the Denver arts community. Did a bunch of in-person workshops like we're doing right now. We did a virtual workshop, and we got some great responses out of that. Quite a few in-depth interviews, like I said, with some venues, with some other arts leaders in Denver. And in total, we had outreach to over 250 stakeholders. So that number was very targeted at people that had an active interest in the arts complex. We did not go out to the community, right? Just the general people that live in Denver community. We did not target them. We targeted organizations, individual stakeholders that have a direct interest or future interest in the arts complex. That was our methodology for who we decided to talk to. And our phone number and everything will be up a couple times, but feel free. We encourage you to share this with anybody else that might be interested. And we will be sharing, this video will be on our website for a couple weeks, so we'll make sure that link gets out to everyone. So here's what we heard from you. There seems to be a general demand to use the arts complex in some capacity. A lot of different organizations said they have an interest in using it. It may not be the only place they want to perform, but they do have an interest in going there. It's certainly, we all know it's a desirable location. It's the heart of downtown, and that whole area is kind of built around the arts. It's densely populated. If you see anything that's in italics, that's a direct quote. We heard that the arts complex is a major asset to the community. That's great to hear. The arts complex has a strong reputation. The idea for arts organizations, if you get an opportunity to perform there, to present your work, it elevates the work you're doing. You're at the kind of the biggest thing in town, right? And so the arts complex is known for that. It's known for elevating the work that comes in. And it certainly has the name recognition, even at a national level. You talk about the arts complex at any conference, they're going to know exactly what you're talking about. It's a huge asset for Denver. Absolutely high production capability. The standards there, the ability to put on a really good show, to put on a really good event, it's well known for that. And then there's, like I said, the opportunity to elevate organizations. So you come in and you might do something that you might not have been capable of otherwise. What are the barriers? This is absolutely key, and this is one of the key points that we're trying to address with this study. Cost prohibitive. We've heard cost over and over and over again, whether it's rental fees or labor or equipment, right? These are expensive venues to use, and we really understand that even depending on the size of organization, even small amounts of what seems like small amounts of money when you're kind of dealing with a big pot can actually be a lot, right? And so when we identify barriers, cost is a critical one. I think this is a great quote. We incur such a debt that it's going to take us the next 2 years to hopefully get back there, right? So you shouldn't go somewhere to do your art that completely bankrupts you. And so that's making sure that your space is appropriate, right? And then we heard about parking. That's a known issue. Definitely heard a lot about there being limited availability to get in, right? So what's the calendar? Who do I talk to? Who controls the calendar? What kind of opportunities there are? What's the availability of space? We heard a lot about that being an issue of even being unclear who do you go to, right? And we specifically heard a lot about rehearsal space. That seems to be, and it's kind of from each of the studies we've done in this area, it's not surprising us each time we're hearing that rehearsal space is difficult to find for performing arts organizations. And so that was something we really, really honed in on. But I think this is another great quote. We get whatever's left over. Nobody wants to feel like they're getting the leftovers, right? Certainly heard about the ticketing system. There's some challenges with that, especially kind of even down to the fees and everything else. And then we also heard about there being some really good things that are happening right now about improving ADA access and technology, and that being something that should continue to be emphasized by the arts complex and its users. And so I think for those of you who are here for the last community arts meeting, we kind of challenged you on what would be the ideal space for your organization, right? What we learned was there's not enough of it, right? There's not enough appropriately sized space in Denver. But what we've seen is also a lot of organizations are building space. We did not find the perfect silver bullet for complementary space that's one thing will solve everybody's problems. I think there's no such thing as the perfect hall is a good way to put that. And that's really true anywhere, right? You have to kind of form your art to what opportunities you have. But I think in the case of where studies in the past that suggested that there was one space you could build that would serve the community perfectly, we don't agree with that. And then we also heard, and this was something that actually was really surprising to me, is just outdoor space in general is really valuable. People want opportunities to perform outside. And so that was something that was I kind of said, oh, no one really wants to perform outside. Not true. We also heard a lot about flexibility, needing to be able to take a space and turn it into what works for your organization. And that's something that seems to be kind of unusual or unique in Denver. It's hard to find good flexible space. Everything's kind of not perfect for what the organization needs. And I think the idea of focusing investment on the community was really important too. Like, the arts complex exists for everybody. And so one of the things that I think we heard from all of you was the operator, arts and venues or whomever else is involved in the arts complex needs to focus some of their investment on the community that it serves. And I think that was something we heard over and over again. We also looked at one of the tenets of the next stage was this idea of enliven, diversify, and sustain. And we asked this question, of basically every stakeholder we possibly could. And it's absolutely a sort of a key set of principles that I think will be really important moving forward. But the idea of enlivening, right? There's a pretty good perception, I think it's shared among most people, and I'll say I share this too. You walk through the arts complex on a cold day in February, and it's a ghost town, right? The idea that there needs to be 24/7 activation, that's not just about putting on a show, but there's something always going on there, so it doesn't feel like a ghost town. We've heard the idea it looks like a prison. There's some sort of brutalist architecture, front or whatever, but it needs to. The arts complex needs to be enlivened, and we agree with that. That was something that came out of the next stage, and we completely agree with. The idea of what does diversify mean? Because that's a really broad word that's used in a bunch of different ways. But I think we came to the conclusion that what the community means by that is create belonging. Everybody should feel like, whether they're a patron, a performer, that they belong there, that the arts complex is theirs. And I think that's absolutely critical. And I think one of the things, too, kind of thinking about the future, right? The arts complex is there to build the next generation of patrons. So not only engaging the perfect demographic of 50 to 65-year-old people that go to the arts all the time, but also engaging the 10 to 15-year-olds that would never even have thought they should have walked in the arts complex. That being something that continues to be emphasized, and that's something that the resident companies are doing now, and it needs to be a through line in order to continue to generate those audiences into the future. And then what does sustain mean? Obviously planning, right? Thinking about the future, making sure that the arts complex will continue to be viable. I liked this quote: less preaching to people about what art is and more responding to what people want for their art. The arts complex cannot be set in its ways indefinitely. It has to change, it has to adapt, it has to grow with the breadth of Denver, right? And so that's something I think that everybody within the project team is really committed to, is that idea of it being reflective, the arts complex being reflective of the community that it serves. So then we went into inventory and utilization. So there's our map. Kind of know what we're talking about. There's a lot of different spaces at the arts complex. And a key thing to understand is there are two operators at the arts complex. There's Denver Arts and Venues, the city, and then there's DCPA. And so DCPA controls primarily the Helen Bonfils Theater Complex. They also have the Gardner Galleria Theater. And Arts and Venues controls the larger spaces and then kind of your outdoor spaces. And so this is something that not everybody understands, that we've heard a lot about. I hear it all the time. In fact, I've been guilty of it. Oh, it's DCPA, the whole thing, right? Or, oh, it's Denver, the whole thing. Well, it's not true. There's two operators on the campus. And so there's quite the inventory there. We're talking about from a 50-person event space up to your 7,000-person sculpture park that Live Nation enjoys so much. So there's quite the amount of venues and different event and performance spaces on the campus already. And so what we had to do there was look at what is the current utilization of the arts complex? How are these venues being used? And so we looked at each space, and I promise it looks better on that screen than this one. They're all kind of sad colors here. But we looked critically at days that are dark, days that aren't dark, right? This is that simple. Days with events, days without events. And one of our metrics that our team used was the idea that you want to be shooting for 60 to 80% at least, right? Anything above that could get pretty scary. If you won't have enough staff to run a venue at 100%, right? You're going to burn everybody out. A venue at 20% would be pretty quiet. And so we're broadly defining this as days with events, but an event day isn't just a performance day. It's also a rehearsal day. It's also a load in. It's also a load out. If you walked in one of these buildings and you walked to the stage, would there be something going on, right? And so this is exactly what that is. So you can kind of see our interior here, but the studio loft, which for those of you that are familiar with it, it's sort of an event space, performance space. It's had moderate utilization over the years, but especially recently it's had less, and that's due to some operational changes within the space. Becher kind of sitting in that 65% range, the Buell sitting in the low 70s, and then the Ellie is like the workhorse building, workhorse venue on campus, sitting in the 80s. There's not much left to build within that unless you kind of change how it's being operated. So it's kind of looking at the studio lot specifically, which we see this as a space that has a lot of opportunity for the community. It is not the perfect space, we recognize that. And those of you, I think family's been in there before, right? It poses challenges, but it is very flexible. It has the characteristics of a performance space. It has a grid. There's flexibility about projections, that type of stuff. We look drilling down, and this is something that we did for all of the spaces. How is it being used? Okay, we know what its total utilization percentage is, but quite a bit of rehearsal, right? Some meetings, there's probably rentals, and I've certainly held some meetings in there. Receptions. If the way that performances are defined, it's actually not really been used much as a performance space. It's in like the 3% range. Mark Kaiser walked in, and he could probably tell this more than anybody because I started with his chart. But this space has a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of days left. We're sitting at 47 or 53% utilization. That's 180 days a year, right? It might be able to be utilized for the community. Kind of look at when it's utilized. This is what we did. This is for the Helen Bonfils Theater Complex. This time we actually go back to 2015. Sorry, I have a better chart later on for actual days of the week. But so now we're getting into space operated by DCPA. And so this is in the Helen Bonfils Theater Complex. So their complex that has all their different theaters. And the DCPA has a little bit different model because Arts and Venues is an agency that operates these spaces, but they're not presenting, right? They're not producing things, they're not building things on stage. They're facilitating others to come in. DCPA is an organization that has many different facets, but one of the things they do is they put on plays. And so that takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, and requires a lot of stage time. Well, when we look at this, there may even still be some opportunities there as well. The Jones Theater it's kind of changed utilization based on some of their other renovations. Ricketson, Sewell Ballroom, 50 to 60s. Space Theater really, because of the renovations, is sort of a tough one to look at, but especially in 2018, very, very busy. And then the Stage Theater has been very busy as well. So especially in some of the smaller spaces, there's opportunity there, right? Now, we heard last time, as I threw this slide up, this may not be the perfect space for every organization. 196 seats can be challenging to make really profitable. But it exists, and it's there. And it's another space that has opportunity for additional utilization. And so we kind of looked at drilling a little bit deeper, when has it been used? And this is another issue. I think this goes back to the leftovers question, right? Or leftovers comment. We don't want organizations to feel like they're getting the leftovers. And so we looked at all of the different spaces on the campus, and especially for Helen Bonfils Theater Complex, their shoulder seasons, the summer's pretty dead, but you're really busy in the fall and spring. And so there's challenges, especially in the bigger spaces, to utilize them. But there's definitely opportunity here. Especially in the last year, things have really declined as DCPA has opened up new spaces. So now we get to recommendations. You ready?
Recommendation?
You're ready? Yeah, I'm done.
Well, I'd like to hear if there's any questions first.
Yeah.
Anything that you just saw, there's a lot of information. Any thoughts, any questions, any comments? Yes, sir.
To the extent that there is upside for booking more of anything at the Studio Loft or the Jones Theater, how does that comport with available space in comparable venues that you studied? In other words, would Janus be competing with the next person that's got the same size or roughly the same configuration as the Jones?
Absolutely, yeah. No, there's competition in town, but and we're going to talk about our recommendations in a minute here, but one of the things we see is there being opportunity to at least open the doors more, right? And so whether people want to use it or not, the goal is and the hope is to have more opportunity. And so, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yes, there's other spaces that are 200 seats in town. There's other spaces, there's other flexible spaces like the Studio Loft that are 500 seats. And we're not saying those are the only 2 spaces on the entire Arts Complex campus that have opportunity. There's opportunity in all of them. And so, instead of building the perfect space that does everything for everyone, we think the perfect spaces exist because they're all different and everybody's needs are different. And so we're excited about what we found, and we're encouraging, and you'll see this in where Victor's about to go, we're absolutely encouraging that Denver Arts and Venues and DCPA take the next steps on that to help open the doors and make it easier and break down those barriers for other organizations to come in and use the time that nobody else is.
And so, regarding the barriers, and bearing in mind what Alex has presented, all the data that we found and the spaces that are available, it's not only about space, right? It's not only about building, it's not only about the spaces that you can use. It's about a program that will encourage the community to use spaces at the Arts Complex. It's a program that encourages the community participation at the Arts Complex because we think that that's a great asset for the city. And yes, there's competition, as Alex pointed out, but not on the Arts Complex. I think that the Arts Complex is a place that people want to go to. They want to perform there because of its stature, its brand. And so when we talk about community access and breaking down some of the barriers, cost was a big issue for people. People felt like they couldn't afford the space. It would take them 2 years to recoup the money that they lost during the time. So I applaud the Denver Arts and Venues and DCPA for listening to this and maybe embracing the idea of maybe there's a way to underwrite and subsidize access to these spaces if there's time available. It's a proactive kind of program that you can undertake. And we did some work with benchmarking other venues, other facilities around the country and tried to understand what they were doing to encourage community participation. And Teresa in a second is going to tell you what we found in that case. But using subsidies, underwriting access, providing that kind of program for community access to these facilities that are available at the time that are available is something that we encourage Denver Arts and Venues and DCPA to embrace. What we found when we talked to, there you are, what we found when we talked to other venues, they have programs that encourage this participation. We talked to 4 or 5 national performing arts centers that are comparable to Denver Arts and Venues in their array of facilities. And maybe you can talk about what we discovered there.
Yeah, so some of these operators they have some exciting programs such as the rental subsidy program, which is offering discounted rates to smaller budget organizations. And then some operators are taking it to another level where they might decide that there's room in the budget for 3 to 4 select organizations to utilize a specific venues for free. And there's a relationship building process and a lot of work that goes into selecting those organizations and making sure that they fit in with the mission and that they fit in with diversity initiatives so that they're offering the space really to the larger community. And then along those lines, there's a lot of relationship building that's involved. So these operators are proactively going out into the community to connect with organizations, especially if there is dates available on the calendar. There's outreach that these operators are doing to connect with those organizations to say, hey, we have some dates. Would you like to use them? Can we offer them to you at a discounted rate? So that it isn't just a one-sided conversation where operators are fielding requests, they're actually doing some proactive outreach. And then on the flip side of that, taking a strong kind of customer service approach so that when requests do come in, the phone is being answered. There's lots of conversations about how we can work with operators, can work with these organizations to say, well, okay, if we can't fit you in on this date or in this particular venue, I know another venue across town that can probably help you. And so that kind of relationship building is really important for these operators. And then finally, co-producing. So some operators are working with organizations that have diverse audiences, and they'll say, I know I'm not gonna, as an operator, I'm probably not gonna make any money off of presenting this work, and I'm not interested in that, but I'm gonna co-present it with you because we wanna get your audiences into our venues, and we wanna make sure that these venues are being utilized by the whole community, and so that everyone feels like it's their space too. So there's a way that that kind of co-producing can sit on the budget line as this is how we're investing in the community.
And for a lot of these venues that we spoke with, it's a nonprofit operator. And the nonprofit operator usually identifies funding through either foundations or individual sources that can subsidize these programs because we take seriously the sustainable part of the enliven, sustain, and diversify, or whatever the combination is. It costs money to operate these venues, and it's expensive. And I think there is funding available for these kinds of programs around the nation, and maybe we could explore some of those ideas. But what we don't want to have happen is a program being developed and it really cuts into your budget and makes it a deficit kind of look. So that's what we've discovered, and that's what we recommend in terms of a proactive kind of program that we would partner with community organizations on spaces that are available at the arts complex. Any questions about that?
I'm just going to say one other point to make here, because some of the things that this study looks at is big on infrastructure upgrades, that type of stuff. But this is something that could happen soon. This is not going to wait for someone to put a shovel in the ground. This is something that the arts complex can work on now. And so we're encouraging Denver Arts and Venues and DCPA to really think about this and start the process. Now, it's not going to happen overnight. It's quite a programmatic change. Not that both organizations have been doing stuff like this, but not with any sort of with a model that really attacks it. And so it doesn't have to wait 10 years. It can be 1 to 2 years. And so we feel really positive about that, and we're certainly encouraging them to start soon.
Under the model, is there one point of contact or outreach, or is it anticipated that DCPA and Denver Arts and Venues each do their own approach to outreach to the community groups or others that want to perform?
So what do you think about that? What do you think should be?
I think it'd be better if there's one point of contact doing the outreach that serves both entities.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you're anticipating.
Well, right now the structure is there will be 2, but I think your point is well taken. And I think that they're listening to it.
And this is not developed yet. This is in process. We've not handed them the perfect program because it doesn't exist. But this is where we are today. And so comments on this is absolutely critical so that they have the opportunity to develop something that makes sense. So that's a great comment.
I think I would ask Ginger, anybody here, is there already budget within Arts and Venues or even SCFD to be able to create some of these kind of grants or credits right away, at least in your venues?
Well, I would say yes and no, in the sense that we just submitted our 2020 budget to City Council and the Mayor this 2 weeks ago. So there's that piece of it. But that being said, I think it can be iterative, and we already do, to the point that was made, we already do some of these things already. And so it's a matter of perhaps growing what we're currently doing or making it more widely known, and then there might be a process by which those things get determined and vetted. So it's not to say because our budget is submitted, it's set in stone, but just to manage expectations, we also have to live by
Just understanding the bureaucracy of the city, and that after a budget is already submitted, it's going to be difficult, right? For year one.
Program development is quicker than building a building.
Yeah.
So I think
Absolutely, it might be next year, not 5
it
years.
would take time to develop a program, and it would take time to develop a budget that would support that.
right,
But less time than to build a new building.
right.
So we lead into Robert's part of the presentation here.
Do we have a graphic of any sort? Yes.
That's it.
You get death by PowerPoint here with lots and lots of words.
So a couple of things. One is the word program is so multi-used. We're talking about programs of activity. You're handed a program when you walk into the auditorium. The space program is the list of how many square feet each space needs to be. So it's this wonderful universal word that we keep throwing around and having lots of different uses of. But in this regard, it's always fun to be with people in performing arts and ask for the number that comes to mind between the time that artists, dancers, actors, musicians are on stage performing compared to preparing to perform. So anybody want to venture some number in your mind? Out of 100%, how much of it is in preparation?
80,
20.
We saw the pie chart earlier.
It usually ranges between 80 and 90% is preparation, 20 and 10 to 10% is performance. That's a huge number. We all live that all the time. And for the community, it's always the scramble, where to rehearse. And the goal is to get into a performance space and to perform efficiently and have this incredible experience. But the rehearsal spaces are rooms like this, or church basements, or wherever you can find it, or rent it, or borrow it, or wish you had it. So one of the wonderful things that would attract groups to come to the campus is, I have to just look at this again. This is well, let's start with it. Let's start right here. 3 rehearsal spaces. A large one, this is large. This is
4,500.
This is equivalent to rehearsing on the LA stage, or performing on the LA stage. It's got elbow room, it's the full size. This is your classic ballet dance studio, 40 by 40, with elbow room so that you don't break your nose when you run off. And then a smaller sort of choreography, or 1,200 square feet. It's still pretty big, but it's a great size. So we're talking conceptually about 3 major rehearsal spaces and a studio theater. This number of 120 seats is there's a little bit of a logic, but it could be discussed a lot. It needs to be small enough so that the Jones still has its distinction, and yet we don't want to be down to 60 to 80 seats. So we're saying 120 seats as that ladder of performance opportunity. And you could just go from one of these rooms into this and not have to move everything so far. But again, it's smallish.
And it can be used as a rehearsal space as well. So
Yeah,
effectively
becomes the fourth rehearsal space. So we're very much in support of the concept. The working concept could be called the Community Rehearsal Center.
To name it after Robert, obviously.
the program space.
But yeah, the goal would be for this rehearsal center to be built at the Arts Complex. And we also think it would really improve efficiency of the utilization of each of the performance spaces, because you can rehearse here first. You're not rehearsing on stage or scrounging for that space.
Right. So this was my little moment with you, so thank you. And any thoughts about this out there?
Do you want to share a little bit more about the office suite and catering and that type of stuff?
I'm just looking. I just don't want to miss one. Offices. Now, Arts Incubator comes to mind. Everyone, we can't office everyone, but there could be an opportunity to bring groups together so that they talk to each other and share thoughts and opportunities and create new relationships. So that's what the shared community office suite. Catering support is food makes everything happen. So any one of these could be the gala space for a group. It doesn't have to be just a rehearsal room. And then we get down to one of the things we learned Upper Colorado has, is Inglewood.
Mm-hmm.
They have their rehearsal room, but boy, they would love to come and be able to rehearse closer and not just be one of the users of this large space. With a grid, that could become another performance space. Any number of things could happen. These could be also for music. The musicians could come in and perform as well as rehearse. So there's a lot of opportunity in this scenario here. So any questions? Yes.
So the shared community office suite, that would be just like where you'd come in for like a meeting, you wouldn't leave anything there?
No, it could be workstations and cubicles, and then a conference room that gets booked if you are having just a meeting. But it could be for smaller groups that don't have anything but maybe someone's back room. It could be a little bit of an office opportunity.
Well, and as you know, when you're in rehearsals, it's really nice to have some type of support space too.
Right.
So even if it's not your permanent office, it might be something that the stage manager is using after rehearsal to take care of their paperwork, that type of stuff.
And I'm sorry, I should have made it clear that with the performance space, of course, are changing rooms, dressing rooms, green room. So lobby, toilets.
Your
There's a
favorite
question.
toilets.
Yeah, this might be premature, but have you put thought into kind of where on the campus this sits, how it kind of would impact or interface with kind of the rest of the next stage plan and kind of plans?
Our group has had the luxury of not
Right.
considering where, when, what it looks like, what has to move to make
Right.
way. So the answer is no. We're really working in a theoretical.
Well, and this
is what's needed,
Yeah,
not how we're
that's
going
great.
to change.
That's an excellent question too, because those are really good questions, and we, like you said, we get the gift of not having to answer them, but
Right.
we're challenging that process to,
Right.
if this needs to get built, where and all those, but that is next, right? So I get the other recommendations here. I think we really like the enliven, diversify, and sustain idea, and there's nobody that we talked to that didn't have an opinion about what that means. And I think some of the things we learned from those conversations are important to continue to weave into the framework of the arts complex as a whole. So we really encourage Denver Arts and Venues and all the resident companies to embody that and really think about those principles as these projects move forward. We've also looked at Betcher Concert Hall, and it's definitely nearing the end of its useful life. A large amount of the studies that have been done on the campus have focused on Betcher because it's one of the oldest spaces. So we're recommending at this point it be replaced with an 1,800 seat concert hall, and that's something that everyone is in full agreement on as far as size and configuration. And it's really built on the demand projections that we did for the arts in Denver going out to 2050. So it's also smaller. And so maybe a space that's useful for more than just the symphony, might be useful for the community as well. We're encouraging the next phase of this process for there be a continued support and enhancement of outdoor space. We really learned, like I said before, that outdoor space is important, especially for Live Nation. But it's something, even from talking to DCPA, wanting to do more outside, all of the different arts organizations have said that is something valuable. And walking around that campus, I just see opportunity after opportunity with the amount of square feet sitting there. And then one kind of final thing, we've worked on this separately, is we're encouraging there be some investigation on investing in offsite community-focused performance space. We've definitely heard from in this room that one of the things the community values is investing not just downtown. And so we've looked at the Mae Bonke Stanton Theater at Loretto Heights. Some of you might be familiar with that. It's in Southwest Denver as an opportunity for there being some investment. That's not a guarantee, but it has been something we've looked at and it's available. So we're encouraging some continued conversations about that. So we're at the discussion portion of our conversation here. This is the opportunity for feedback. We want to hear you. We want to hear all your angst towards us. We want to hear you tell us how great we are. Yes?
You mentioned early on that staffing is difficult. Will you guys, obviously for Ginger and Janice, if they're going to be looking at reaching out to have more community partners, do you guys have recommendations about what those staffing levels look like? How many people, as well as obviously running a rehearsal center with both office rental and rehearsal rental, and is that 2 people, 3 people, 10 people? Will that be a part of it?
So we are, as part of our study, doing an operating model for both the concert hall and the rehearsal center, and that would include some staffing recommendations. But the answer to your question is it depends. it depends on what the mission of the organization is that's operating it. What are they trying to do? What's kind of the level? You know, obviously a high school performance space may have a different level of, amount of staff than a professional space bringing tours in. It really depends. But I think when we heard that from other venues, a lot of it had to do with they had some type of nonprofit or city influence. Not necessarily Denver was actually, in other parts of the 7 counties. But they're not being able to affect change of levels of staffing as fast as they're selling the buildings, right? So you can only, if you can't staff it, you can't run it. And so I think that was something we heard. Now, also just from like a technical standpoint, it's always hard to find good production staff, and that's something that every venue talks about. And so that will always be a challenge, is making sure that you have enough of those types of staff members too. But it's global. Everybody, if they get to a point where you just can't do more without more help, otherwise you're just going to burn your team out. And I say this from experience.
Regardless of where it's located, what's the cost of the rehearsal space?
We're still working on that. That's something that our cost consultant is looking at. So we'll hopefully have some better numbers for that when we're done with this project, and we'll submit to the project.
And same for Betcher's replacement?
Same answer.
With all of this, my brain immediately went to parking. Parking is a real issue, and I can envision if you have multiple things going on in the complex, plus you're trying to do a rehearsal, plus people are working in the shared office space, where are all of those people going to go? And have you thought about that at all, or kind of what that might look like as far as incorporating a whole other building into the complex and recognizing that's already one of the biggest issues we have?
Yeah, so we're also gifted with the ability to not have to do with parking, because there's another consultant that's been retained to look at the parking for the whole campus. I'm sure Mark would love to just speak a little bit more about that. I can see him burning to.
Actually, you're being modest. Alex has been had the opportunity to sit through some of our mobility study team meetings as well, so you probably could answer.
There's just parking everywhere. Guaranteed, everyone has a spot.
We didn't pay you for that, so we'll take this on. So yeah, we actually did kind of these 2 studies in parallel. We are working with HDR and Fair and Peers and the Department of Public Works, because as you may know, the Department of Public Works oversees the Performing Arts Complex garage on campus. We also partner with our friends at SMG who run the convention center, so we oversee that operation as well. They run the convention center garage, which is proximate to the campus, as you may know. The main thing that we've been looking at is kind of a crystal ball, at least from a long-range perspective. By the time we would build a new rehearsal space, what type of parking needs do we have? What does the campus configuration look like? And the difficult part of the crystal ball is, we're seeing major mobility shift changes right now. We aren't expecting everyone to come in, go to a gala riding on electric scooter. Don't expect that. But as you have seen more changes with rideshare, as autonomous vehicles come online, there will be less of a demand for parking on site. The best example I've been giving is that the airport has actually scrapped plans for major parking garage expansion as they've seen Uber and Lyft rideshare increases. This was just announced in the last couple of months. So we're already seeing it there, and we certainly don't want to run forward with a major investment at the Arts Complex to build out a whole bunch of parking spaces, which could be $50,000 per space to in below grade structured parking for future parking that the demand may not be there. So that plan is coming together about the same time, maybe a little bit after this, within the next month or so. We'll have a document that we can release that speaks to these parking issues. I think just real fast on the short term, because we weren't just doing that crystal ball work, we also were looking to make the drop off and pickup situation for Uber and Lyft a little bit more user friendly. It's right on top of where we have the protected bike lanes, which is an issue because our patrons and our resident companies, certainly DCPA's been with us there as we're sharing the same concerns about our patrons crossing the bike lane with scooters and bikes going the correct direction as well as the wrong direction. So it feels a little bit like Wild West, but that's some of the other things we were looking at from a short-term mobility perspective as well.
Sorry, just one quick thing about parking. I think, and you probably have already looked at this, but the demands and needs for parking for someone who's coming to see a show is different, much different from someone who works there, who has to come from a rehearsal, if you come in from the suburbs, and that's just something to consider. And also demographic. Not everyone is going to ride that scooter. Even younger people are falling off the scooter, so I don't know what's going to happen with that down the road, but it's, a DIA is a different animal because they're way over there, and people, you know, the workers take the train, so.
Correct. No, we agree,
Okay.
and we often jump right to performance times, matinees and evening performances, and what is that patron experience for those times of day. But you know, we all have teams that we work with that are coming to and fro during the day, and so there's definitely those operational challenges as well within the garage, within the convention center garage, and then we have a separate project we're working on with a number of team members at the existing light rail station, and what type of additional improvements we could make to foster more people using not only RTD, but then that last mile connectivity. Are they using scooters? Are they walking? Is there other means to get where they need to from that station? So it's a similar conclusion for that plan, just if I can give some foreshadowing. If there's not that silver bullet, it's not that one thing that is a shocking we're going to do that changes everything. It's those small and intermediate moves of making it better for the patrons coming to shows, for the staff and the team members that are there during the day, and all the different modes that we need to look at.
Yeah, if there was a differentiation between like daily parking and then it changes over at a certain time, and that could even be something coordinated with Public Works, because if you go into a meeting at 1345 Champa, for example, if you have to keep running out to change a meter, it's not that beneficial. Just things, you probably covered it, but I just thought I would mention it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's go.
The one thing that keeps sticking in my head from the presentation is the recommendation to offer some kind of subsidization for the venue and presenters to come in and to help boost venue utilization, which is a very shiny and appealing thing that I can see a lot of groups biting onto. But the only thing that's setting up kind of alarms in my head is that it's going to set up both the venue operator and the presenter to be in a position where, yeah, there might be that subsidy, but it's still not going to set anybody up for success. You know, those charts that you had going up, a lot of those halls are empty in August. I think they're all empty in August for a reason, you know, between people taking their last minute vacations, going back to school. So maybe we need to consider that maybe the venues may be dark at a certain point for a reason. Mm-hmm. And if you're structuring some kind of subsidization program, just to be very careful so you don't go to some small organization that's really desperate to get into the complex, and I think they can make, you know, that seems very alluring and appealing, and then have everybody get in there and still not pull in an audience, and that's just hurting both people, both the venue and the organization. So to me, I think the subsidization thing could be very effective, but that's the one thing I can see people grabbing as a headline or a social media tweet. Subsidization to get into the arts complex, and it seems a little dangerous to me.
That's a good point.
It's a very good point, and I would say that as the program is developed, if it is developed, those kinds of concerns have to be aired and worked through. I do believe, I agree with you that dark nights are dark for a reason, mm-hmm. and we don't want anybody to come into the arts complex and not be successful. That's not the goal. The goal is to be successful and to be in partnership with the arts complex and the community. So that's certainly something that should continue to be discussed and hashed through.
And I think it also kind of goes hand in hand with that leftover dates concept, that the people who are getting into the complex who can find a date, they're, oh, well, this weekend is consistently open. Why don't you try it? Well, maybe it's consistently open for a reason. And so I just think that that should be something that the venue booker should be aware of for people going into those places when they're trying to secure a date.
I think it makes it a little bit easier if the recommendation for the rehearsal center and performance space in the rehearsal center is also part of the equation. Then it becomes a different kind of opportunity, in addition to the venues that are currently online and available. So if those two things happen at the same time, I think it's more, to your point, available at other times that are not dark, traditionally dark.
Yeah, well, and the idea of the rehearsal center too is to create that efficiency. So it's you rehearse for 3 weeks, load in, do performance. You might actually be able to use a weekend that's in a prime time that just happens to fall, between two productions in whichever space.
Yeah.
But if you needed all 4 weeks in that space, you're never going to get it. So that's kind of where we're seeing those opportunities when we look at the calendar, because we look pretty carefully at that. I definitely agree that in general, summer is wide open in some of the spaces, and October is not. But there actually are more little holes than you'd expect, and so we with our findings, we're seeing that it's not going to be perfect, but it's certainly right sizes the space for the organization, not the other way around, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's something that has to be kept in mind, but it's certainly something that we considered beforehand. Not solved yet, but it's a great point.
I'm curious though, for your organization, would you be interested in using a smaller concert hall, 1800-seat concert hall? Would that suit you, or is that too big?
I think 1800 would be ideal.
Ideal.
Yeah.
So that would also be on sort of the palette of opportunities.
Yeah.
Just a comment about the off-site location. I think part of the appeal to other organizations coming and performing here is that it's a feather in your cap to be at the arts complex. But this is more than just going to like Arvada or Englewood. Part of this experience is the journey. Even if it's frustrating to get downtown, part of going to a show at the DCPA is taking the train, getting off work an hour early. It's the whole experience. And so I think if you had a Denver Arts and Venues branded off-site space, that doesn't seem as appealing to me. I would think that's not as big of a feather in your cap. It doesn't have the same cachet.
Well, and something I think that's an interesting point as well. It's been really different groups that have been interested in the arts complex versus not. But we've also seen there be some groups that have overlaps where they really are performing in a bunch of different spaces. So I think you're absolutely highlighting the value of the arts complex and why people want to be there, but it's also, some of those barriers are hard to overcome. And so there being other opportunities, which there are now, and continuing to enhance those other opportunities in places that are a little bit easier to get to is something that we're definitely supporting additional investigation of.
Yeah, and investing in other neighborhoods and communities that might not have as close access to the arts complex is a really good way to diversify the cultural assets that Denver has and make sure that we're really serving the broad city.
Didn't we hear in the last group that something like that may be more beneficial for rehearsal than performance space, just to keep it in the neighborhoods where these organizations are? And also because the potential cost per head.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a reasonable point.
Parking and everything else.
There's some of the barriers like parking and getting downtown and all that exist if you're downtown. But in this particular case, arts and venues can affect change on the campus, and so that's one of the things. This is an opportunity to affect that change, and there is something to be said about practicing your art near where you're going to perform your art. So that's one of the things we see is it being nice to be able to move a production directly out of the 2,500 seat space into the performance space, and it's just down the concourse, right? Yes, ma'am.
And I apologize if I missed this part. So this complex that we're looking at, would the arts organizations, would they and nonprofits have, I guess, a priority, or would we have exclusive use? And the reason why I bring it up is right now we use various spaces in the performing arts complex. And sometimes what ends up happening is that smack dab in the middle of where we need like a 3-day weekend, someone booked a wedding all of a sudden, like a year in advance. And then my whole show goes out the window because I have to change weekends.
Can you do me a favor? You came in a little bit later, right? Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Karen with CM Dance. We've been around since 1999.
Thank you.
And we've been actively producing events in the Performing Arts Complex since about 2010. So we definitely...
One of our recommendations for the future rehearsal center is that the Denver arts community is given priority. Now, that takes governance, that takes a model to be built. It takes, paper and pen, right? But that's what we're recommending is that now there may be, the opera has indicated some interest in utilizing one of the spaces, so there may be a co-user, but especially for 2,400, 1,200, and 2,800 square foot spaces, which are really the appropriate spaces for a lot of arts organizations, those would be primarily community-based.
Sure. I mean, because we've been wanting to, I'll just be honest, we've been wanting to move into this complex for years, where we could rehearse and we could perform, and this is where our administrative offices would be. This is what we have had as an aim for a very long time, so that's why this is an exciting project. So that's why I'm here.
So I'm sitting with these guys from the MISO Arts Center over at the JCC, and they have, as others do around town, they have dark days when they could accommodate rehearsals. And I'm wondering in terms of space or availability, if either, because I don't know the answer to this, and I should, but does the DCPA or does Arts and Venues refer those out? I mean, if you know you can't handle them, you send them to someone else.
We've actually been, we're around the corner from you. We've been trying to, actually, we walked over there to see if you had any space available. We couldn't find anyone to get any information from.
They're right here.
This is future public meetings. That's what we're doing.
I think the answer is yes, and we donated rehearsal space to more than 300 organizations last year because we have 14 studios for our education program and then 6 rehearsal halls for the theater company. And so when we're not using them, it's tricky because you do often get the leftovers because our companies have first right of refusal. So it's hard, but whenever we do have space, we definitely try to make it available. And it's actually run out of our education department because they're the ones that are mostly programming the spaces. But I think a coordinated calendar would be a really interesting idea across all the performing arts organizations in the Front Range to be able to say from institutions of higher ed and whatnot, we could do a much better job in being of service of partner organizations. So I think it's an incredible idea.
So you're in the Newman
Education building, which we own, which isn't a city asset, which is across the street.
Right, which we'll talk later. We were supposed to be in there this summer, and then we got moved. So I would love to talk with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'd love to hear, is there anybody in the room who hasn't spoken yet, who's interested in sharing an opinion about anything? I'm happy to go back to any slides if you need additional clarification or want to dig in deeper.
I'm just curious on the studio loft space, because that space isn't that old. I mean, it's been in the last 10 years, right, that it was renovated and opened. I can't remember which year it was, but
2011.
2011? Is that what you said, Mark?
Yes.
Okay. Other Mark?
Other Mark.
Okay.
We have a lot of Marks in the room, as always.
So 8 years. So that one had the lowest usage, and I'm just curious. I mean, I have never rented it myself personally, but what I have heard from other people is that it's costly, not the space, but the union fees for the other people that are running the facility. So I'm just curious, what are the reasons for the low utilization?
So let me jump in, and then you guys can jump in as well. But I think that is a barrier. There's also some barriers in the fact that it's uniquely located within the L.A. Calkins Opera House. It has its own entrance, but it's on the 3rd floor or 4th floor, and you have to take an elevator up, right? So there's some operational challenges with that, but I think cost is absolutely one of them. Also, I think an understanding that it exists and is available is one of them. Just a pure standpoint of, this is my own opinion, there's some opportunities to enhance some of the technology in there to be more useful for other organizations. That's just what I look around a lot and have some opinions on that. But what is great about it is it's big and can be extremely flexible, and it has a bunch of different configuration opportunities, and it has availability. So I think that's where we see the opportunity, but I think you've addressed a specific barrier, which is it shares some of the same cost barriers as other spaces within the Arts Complex campus.
Yeah,
I would just throw out that the space was originally envisioned as a rehearsal space. Going way back, it was to be a black box, and the money wasn't there in the original build-out. Though we've used it that way more recently with Family's production of Chicago. We used it quite a bit for rehearsal with the opera, and as was mentioned earlier, they've moved to new offices. We kind of helped them with that deal so that we could provide more availability, more capacity for that space. And I think that's why you've seen a little bit of shift in the last couple of years that it is available. The other barrier, though, we have an exclusive food and beverage catering deal with Centerplate and Kevin Taylor Restaurants. So even if the space is available and we subsidize that space to get you in, if you want to have food and beverage for your patrons, it might not be at the rate that you would like to provide for them. So we recognize that that's a challenge, and so it's not just union costs that we're often talking about as a barrier to get in, but what are those food and beverage costs? But I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to add anything
And
to that.
if it's a ticketed event, you have a seat tax.
Correct.
So we recently invested a fair amount of money in technology, lighting, and sound and so forth to help make that production possible. The flip side of that is that, yes, on the one hand, Centerplate is kind of expensive, but we get a little piece of that. Actually, we get a decent piece of that. And so the retail business that we're doing up there in special events and such, in many ways helps, in the same way that Red Rocks helps subsidize our operation. KTRG sells the heck out of that place, which benefits us tremendously in terms of our ability to provide subsidy for other programs.
We just used it. I know I've spoken a lot, but we just used it, and it was actually, I haven't gotten the final bill yet, but there is new lighting and a sound system that was good enough to actually run an orchestra through. And so from the experience of production, this space was fantastic this year. Booking is very tricky because organizations book it a month in advance. We always have this little niche area where we use it. There is a wedding possibly booked in the middle of my event next year, so that's a stress. But it is expensive, but they handled all my production in a top-notch manner, and I was very happy about that. It was very impressive, and it was one less worry.
I would say one of the reasons we made the investment in lighting and sound, in part, was not to try to make the studio loft the black box that we were thinking about, but to really sort of envision what would a black box operation be like at the Arts Complex. It's a matter of some question as to whether it would be, I mean, chances are it would be Union Hall still, but to be purpose-built as a black box is something that I think is, in your recommendation, here we're sampling that, we're trying to get a sense of what would that be like, and what would the access be like, and what would the sort of barriers be, and so on and so forth. So.
Well, but I think that don't discount the fact that it's a pretty cool space, and so I think what you've already done. Now I didn't know they had technology upgrades, so that's news to me. That's awesome. But I think it is a good size. It's an interesting space, and kind of the direction that a lot of performance is going at a national level is to use spaces that are interesting, right? And so I think we should not discount the fact that it is a useful space for the community and has a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, the only barriers, and that's the barriers from my point of view tend to be more on the operational side. So dressing room support and production support and that sort of thing that doesn't exist. The sort of permeability with the opera house and the big whoosh of the air hammer sound makes and things like that. Those are all operational.
You're selling it really well. Things that can be overcome.
Things that can be overcome, for sure.
Time, money, and everything else. You can fix anything, right? Do you have any questions for our group here?
I'm more interested in their questions.
Well, I'm just trying to get some prompts here.
We talked about Betcher replacement. I'd love to hear people's opinions about that idea. The 1800-seat concert hall replacement of Betcher. How do people feel about that?
Well, first question would be, is there going to be better availability if that happens? I mean, right now the symphony takes up most of those days, which you noted are already, there aren't a whole lot of dark days there to begin with. Does that help more of the next generation of cultural patrons, or is it just going to benefit the census?
So let me ask you to make a declarative statement instead of asking a question.
Sure.
What do you think about that?
I think that it's from my perspective, in a for-profit company, it makes it so that it is the one venue on campus that we just don't use.
Because of availability.
Sure, and availability largely. I mean, the configuration doesn't necessarily work as well for the things that a concert company like we do, would be interested in to begin with. But we've certainly tried to put events in there, and we're just the availability wasn't there. So I guess that means that there's a whole new generation of folks that could be going to events in that venue that have never seen it.
Well, from a configuration side, we have not made a recommendation on that, nor are we. But the next generation of folks that look at this would be interested in what you'd have to say about that.
Sure. I mean, keep in mind that if this is going to be primarily a symphony venue, then it's most important that it works for the symphony and secondarily works for things like concerts. There are other places
with that in mind.
One little tweak to the
stage is a little bit easier for a
One thing that would change is the concept of having a large instrumental rehearsal room and a large choral rehearsal room. And to try to administratively become more efficient in the use of the stage so that it's earning money and not being used purely for so much rehearsals.
Sure.
So that would open up a lot of time.
So in your perspective, because we actually had this conversation today, what types of days of the week are valuable for commercial rentals like that?
Realistically, Thursday through Saturday, but things that are compelling any day.
Okay.
And because of where we're situated in the country, our routing doesn't always work on these one-off days to be Thursday through Saturday. There's a reason that we're doing the Jonas Brothers at Pepsi Center Tuesday tomorrow, and now it'll be Saturday night.
Sounds really fun.
Fine, but it's a sold-out show. It's a compelling event. It's the kind of thing that's going to sell on that day of the week. It's not necessarily going to mean that we're going to be able to bring in everything on a Tuesday, but there are certainly things that make sense that that'll work no matter what day we bring them.
From a just pure size standpoint, does that work within the inventory that you're kind of looking at throughout Denver?
Sure. Yeah, I mean it's kind of a sweet spot in between where other things already exist. Similar enough to the other venues, and we use the Paramount Theater a lot, for example, which is similarly sized. So
different configuration
that works for more of our things, and that probably wouldn't stop because of something like this, but it's not always available either.
Yeah, comment.
I'd also like to mention that outdoor venues are really important to most arts organizations. Our favorite place to play is under the glass of the Galleria. We'd love to have a ticketed event under the glass of the Galleria. Free concerts are great, but they don't help our bottom line. So I'd love to know who I might talk with in the future about figuring out a way where we could cordon off an area and have a ticketed event. It hasn't seemed possible in the past, but I think once we put our minds to it, there probably is a solution somewhere. And that would really help enliven the space in the summer.
I think your person to talk to is Mark Heiser right there.
But you're highlighting a point, which is one of the things that can be improved potentially is that those points of contact for discussing ideas like that.
Great, thank you. We will.
Go straight to Mark.
Well, just to piggyback on that, I don't know how long it's been since you've been offering a cafe under the Galleria, but that seems like it's been highly successful. Every event, show I've been to, it seems like people are taking advantage of that, so that's a nice improvement. I don't know, a year maybe, or it's been long?
Couple of years.
Yeah. Couple of years?
Year 3.
Okay. I have a bad sense of time.
I would say, if I may, one of the things we found is when we start talking about activation in the arts complex, when we do these destination events and nothing else is going on, it's harder to draw people to the Glass Top Bar or movie. When we have a mixed taste and DCPA is hosting in ballroom, then certainly a pre-function activity in gallery tennis, or people are coming for a drink to the Glass Top Bar and then they're heading on to a show in one of the other theaters, then it's just what we want to see. It looks active, people are there early, they're having a good time, but there's a fine line between that value add, or you're adding some additional activation when they're already busy, to it's a Monday night, it's a dark night, and we put the Glass Top Bar out, and you're not going to see too many people out there.
Unless the Jonas Brothers are playing.
Yes. They're a night early before they roll over to the Pepsi Center. Right.
They're just under the sculptures or something.
But just one other thought I was having about, everybody tends to want the space at the same times, right? That's one of the challenges, is that, when there are dark days, that they're there for a reason. The point was made earlier. So what are groups beyond arts and community groups, which you're trying to serve first, but what are other groups that could utilize the space during those times of the day? And they could be business groups, they could be higher ed with the campus, and I don't know what kind of outreach or marketing has been done in that regard, but a lot of businesses are looking for off-site corporate events, but I just don't think they know where to go to even find that information. I know, Mark, we keep looking at you going,
well, actually, it's not me. We do, for us, it's the question of, if we put the arts and culture first and work around the edges, the working around the edges does fall to KTRG. And so they have their marketing efforts. They reach out. We work a lot with the convention center on business meetings and sort of overflow, if you will. There's a lot of appealing reasons why a daytime meeting or even conferences happen in the LA. That's a lot of sort of work around the edges and make it productive occupancy in those venues. It's just, they can do the Tuesdays, they can do the Wednesdays and support.
Any other thoughts?
Good job.
Certainly don't want to take any more time than we have to, but just to kind of in summation, like where we are, what our recommendations are, we really believe in that right-sized approach. We really don't think there's a silver bullet to solve every problem. We're really encouraging of arts and venues and DCPA to work on the programmatic solutions for encouraging Denver arts community access. We think that's a viable path forward, and there's places to improve from what's being done now. I think both organizations are doing a good job, but there's always room for more opportunity, especially from what we've seen now that everybody's seeing, with the current utilizations, there are opportunities to do more. We think the concert hall makes sense. We think it needs to be replaced, and that's kind of where we are. The rehearsal center makes a lot of sense too, but that we kind of started this project with all of these studies in the past and all these different recommendations, and I think we've really kind of cut it down, right? We've edited and we're really trying to move forward with a pathway that makes sense and is not just kind of cool ideas on a piece of paper that have pretty pictures. I think in our interview, if the three of you recall, we said we're not the pretty picture firm. This is not the pretty picture team, though. I can take a photo or two, okay? This is they're all lovely people, but this is not we're not the architecture firm that's going to draw you a beautiful building, right? We're the team that looked at the data, and this is where we are today, and these are our recommendations based on it. So we stand behind them, and we're extraordinarily thankful that you're here today. So
since you were saying a few words about your
that was good.
I thought I would take the opportunity to wrap up to say thank you to this team, because when I was thinking back to the interviews and what your commitment was from a public outreach perspective, but also the number of meetings that it was going to take internally to get where we are, there's probably been a little bit more than you had anticipated. So this team's done a really outstanding job of trying to be available and meet with stakeholders and develop this process when it's not quite as maybe sexy as what is the design of a new symphony hall and what's it going to look like, which everyone wants to know about. But since you've been such a great team, this is not the end. And as Alex mentioned earlier, and that they will be available. If you have any thoughts that you don't want to discuss in front of the whole group, they are available, again, all of us on the project team available for phone calls, email, and follow-up before they finish the final report over the course of the next month in October. So,
and I want to give some credit here. We have Tanya and Mara are in the room as well. They were part of our communications team, and they've been really instrumental in helping us make sure that we can get to all of you. So they didn't get to introduce themselves at the beginning because they were helping take care of the tiny little pieces of paper to get you up here. But it's a large team, and it's definitely been a team effort. So and certainly a big thank you to Arts and Venues and all of the resident companies, because they've been extremely forthright and open, really opened the books to us. And that's been absolutely a process, and we could not have gotten to where we are without their absolute commitment to the success of the project. So, if you want a recording of this workshop, please visit the study team website. If you want, I'm going to leave this up so you can take some photos here. But we'll have the recording up for a couple weeks. You're also welcome to either call yourself or encourage other people that might be interested to call our hotline or send an email to our study email address. We take a careful look at that. You can also use snail mail if you're still doing that. I like postcards. Just send me one, please. But please also feel free to share the video with other people you think will be interested in this. We want to make sure that in the next couple of weeks we really get that feedback. The study is wrapping up at the end of October, so post that we'll see. We may keep it open for a little bit longer. We haven't decided yet if we want to keep all of this stuff up, but ultimately, please make your voice heard. Make sure your colleagues make their voices heard before this process is over. And thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Thank you all.